I never thought I'd be the type of person to buy a house sight unseen, but there I was, staring at my laptop screen at 2 in the morning, finger hovering over the Submit Offer button. The farmhouse looked like something out of a horror movie. Peeling paint, sagging porch, windows that seemed to stare back at me like hollow eyes. But the price was right. $10,000 for 5 acres and a house that, according to the listing, just needed some TLC. I'd been living in a cramped Chicago apartment for 3 years, watching my savings dwindle while my stress levels skyrocketed. My grandmother's inheritance wasn't much, but it was enough to make a change. The real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Linda, had been honest about the property's condition during our phone call. "It's been empty for about 15 years, she'd explained. "The previous owners just walked away during the foreclosure. Bank's been trying to unload it ever since." "Any major structural issues?" I'd asked. "Well, the roof needs work, and I'm sure there are plumbing and electrical problems, but the bones are good. It's a 1920s farmhouse, built to last." What she didn't mention, what nobody mentioned, was what I'd find hidden beneath those good bones. I clicked submit at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. By Friday, I was the proud owner of a piece of rural Ohio that most people would have considered a money pit. My friends thought I'd lost my mind. My parents were convinced I was having some sort of breakdown. Maybe they were right. But as I loaded my Honda Civic with everything I owned and started the drive from Chicago to my new life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. The farmhouse was waiting for me, along with secrets that had been buried for decades. Chapter 2. First Impressions. The reality of my purchase hit me the moment I turned down the gravel driveway. The photographs had been generous. The farmhouse wasn't just run down. It was practically falling apart. Shingles littered the yard like fallen leaves, and the front porch sagged so dramatically that I wasn't sure it would support my weight. But the setting was beautiful. Rolling hills stretched in every direction, dotted with old oak trees and stone walls that spoke of the property's agricultural past. A red barn, in slightly better condition than the house, stood about 50 yards away. The silence was profound after years of city noise. I parked next to what had once been a flower garden and now resembled a small jungle. The key Linda had given me turned easily in the front door lock, which creaked open to reveal a time capsule from the 1980s. The interior was a maze of wood paneling, harvest gold appliances, and carpet that had seen better decades. But beneath the dated decor, I could see the craftsmanship Linda had mentioned. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, and solid plaster walls that had withstood nearly a century. The kitchen was the heart of the house, with a large farmhouse sink and windows that looked out over the back pasture. It was here that I noticed the first sign of something unusual, a section of the floor that didn't quite match the rest. The boards were the same age and style, but they sat slightly higher as if something had been installed underneath. I made a mental note to investigate later. For now, I had more pressing concerns, like figuring out if the electricity worked and whether the well pump was functional. As evening fell and I set up my sleeping bag in what would become my bedroom, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. I'd bought a house that might collapse around me, but it was mine. Every creaking board, every drafty window, every mystery hidden in its walls, all mine to discover. Chapter 3. Settling in. The first week was a blur of basic survival tasks. I quickly discovered that the electricity worked sporadically, the plumbing was a disaster, and the heating system hadn't functioned since the Clinton administration. But I was determined to make it work. I set up a temporary camp in the living room using a camping stove for cooking and battery-powered lanterns for light. The nearest hardware store was 20 miles away, and I made daily pilgrimages for supplies, slowly accumulating the tools and materials I'd need for basic repairs. The locals were friendly but curious about the city person who'd bought the old Henderson place. At the hardware store, I met Earl, a retired farmer who became my unofficial advisor on rural living. "That house has good bones," he told me, echoing Linda's words. "Old man Henderson built it himself back in the 20s. Raised 5 kids there before the Depression hit." "What happened to the family?" I asked. Earl's expression grew thoughtful. "Hard times. Lost the farm in the 30s, but they managed to hang on to the house. Last of the Hendersons died in the 80s. Place has been empty ever since, except for some renters who didn't stay long." Why didn't the renters stay? Oh, you know how it is with old houses. Strange noises, drafts, that sort of thing. People get spooked. I didn't think much of Earl's comment at the time. Every old house had its quirks, and I was too busy with immediate concerns to worry about things that went bump in the night. But as I worked on basic repairs during those first weeks, I began to notice oddities. Tools would disappear and reappear in different locations. I'd hear footsteps upstairs when I was working in the basement, and that raised section of kitchen floor continued to nag at me. It wasn't until my third week in the house that curiosity finally got the better of me, and I decided to investigate what lay beneath those slightly elevated floorboards. Chapter 4. The Discovery. I'd been putting off the kitchen floor investigation, telling myself I had more important repairs to tackle. But on a rainy Thursday afternoon, with nothing else pressing to do, I finally gathered the courage to take a closer look. The raised section was about 4 feet square, located near the pantry. Up close, I could see that the boards had been carefully cut and reinstalled, probably decades ago based on the weathering. Someone had taken great care to match the wood and make the repair as invisible as possible. I started by gently prying up one of the boards with a crowbar. It came up easier than expected, revealing a gap underneath. My heart started racing as I realized this wasn't just a repair, it was a deliberate concealment. Working carefully, I removed several more boards until I had exposed a rectangular opening. Below was darkness, but I could make out what appeared to be wooden steps leading down into some kind of underground space. I grabbed my flashlight and peered into the opening. The beam revealed a small room, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, with stone walls and a dirt floor. It was clearly hand-dug, probably during the house's original construction. "What the hell?" I muttered, my voice echoing slightly in the hidden space. The air that drifted up smelled musty but not unpleasant, like an old basement or root cellar. I could see what looked like wooden shelves along one wall and some kind of furniture covered with cloth. Every rational part of my brain told me to call someone. The police, maybe, or at least Earl from the hardware store. But curiosity won out over caution. I tested the wooden steps with my weight, found them solid, and carefully descended into the hidden room. What I found down there would change everything I thought I knew about my new home and the family who had built it. Chapter 5. The Hidden Room. The underground room was larger than it had appeared from above. My flashlight beam revealed stone walls that had been carefully mortared, wooden shelves lined with glass jars, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. The air was surprisingly dry, suggesting good drainage and ventilation. As my eyes adjusted, I could see that this wasn't just a root cellar, it was a carefully constructed hiding place, complete with a small table, chairs, and what appeared to be a bed in one corner. The shelves held dozens of mason jars filled with preserved foods that looked decades old. But it was the other items that caught my attention. A stack of newspapers from the 1930s, a wooden radio that looked like it belonged in a museum, and a metal box that sat prominently on the central table. I approached the box carefully, half expecting it to be locked. But the latch opened easily, revealing a collection of documents, photographs, and personal items that told a story I never could have imagined. The first thing I saw was a letter, written in careful handwriting on yellowed paper. It was dated September 15th, 1932, and addressed, "To whoever finds this room." My hands shook slightly as I read the opening lines. "If you are reading this, then our secret has finally been discovered. My name is Robert Henderson, and this room has been our family's salvation during the hardest times our country has ever known." The letter went on to explain that the room had been built as a hiding place during Prohibition, when Robert's father had operated a small still to help the family survive. But during the Depression, it had served a different purpose, as a shelter for people passing through who had nowhere else to go. "We have helped more than 50 families over the past 3 years," the letter continued. "People who lost everything, who were traveling west looking for work, who just needed a safe place to rest. This room has been their sanctuary, and ours." I sat back on my heels, trying to process what I was reading. My farmhouse hadn't just been a home. It had been a station on an underground railroad of sorts, helping desperate families during America's darkest economic period. Chapter 6. Family Secrets. The metal box contained a treasure trove of documents that painted a vivid picture of the Henderson family's secret activities during the 1930s. There were letters from grateful families who had stayed in the hidden room, photographs of people I didn't recognize, and a detailed journal that Robert Henderson had kept throughout the Depression years. One entry, dated October 3, 1933, particularly struck me. The Kowalski family arrived yesterday with 3 children, all under 10 years old. They've been walking for 2 weeks since losing their farm in Nebraska. Mary gave them the room for 5 days while they rested, and I helped Mr. Kowalski find work at the Miller farm. The children were so thin when they arrived, but they're already looking better. Another entry from 1934. Had to turn away a family today. Too risky with the federal agents sniffing around about the still. Broke my heart to see those people continue down the road with nowhere to go, but we can't help anyone if we're in prison. The photographs were even more moving. Black and white images of families with all their possessions loaded into broken-down cars. Children with hollow eyes and patched clothes. Men with the defeated posture of those who had lost everything. But there were also pictures of hope. The same families looking healthier after their stay, children smiling, people who had found work and were ready to start over. I found a map tucked into the journal, hand-drawn and showing a network of safe houses and helpful contacts throughout Ohio and the surrounding states. The Henderson farm was marked as Station 7, suggesting it was part of a larger, organized effort to help displaced families during the Depression. But the most surprising discovery was a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were addressed to the Angel family and came from all over the country: California, Oregon, Washington State. Former guests writing years later to thank the Hendersons for their kindness, updating them on their lives, and in some cases, offering to help other families in need. I realized I was sitting in a piece of American history that had been hidden for nearly a century. Chapter 7. The Journal Entries. I spent hours reading through Robert Henderson's journal, completely absorbed in the day-to-day reality of running a secret shelter during the Great Depression. His entries revealed not just the logistics of helping desperate families, but the emotional toll it took on his own family. "Mary worries constantly about the children finding out," read one entry from 1934. "We've told them the sounds from the kitchen at night are just the house settling, but young Billy is getting suspicious. He asked me yesterday why we always seem to have extra laundry on the line." The Hendersons had 5 children of their own, ranging in age from 6 to 16 during the peak years of their underground operation. Robert's entries showed how they struggled to maintain normalcy for their own family while secretly helping others. "Had to send our own children to bed without dessert so there would be enough food for the family downstairs," he wrote in November 1934. "It breaks my heart, but they understand that some people have even less than we do." The entries also revealed the constant fear of discovery. Local authorities were apparently suspicious of the Henderson farm, though they never found concrete evidence of wrongdoing. "Sheriff Morrison came by again today asking questions about the extra traffic he's been seeing on our road," Robert wrote in early 1935. "Told him we've been having trouble with the well and needed to bring in workers. He didn't look convinced, but he left without searching the property." The most poignant entries dealt with the families they couldn't help. "Turned away the Johnson family today because we already have the Millers staying in the room," Robert wrote in December 1934. "Mrs. Johnson was pregnant and looked ready to give birth any day. I gave them what food I could spare and directions to the Methodist church in town, but I doubt they'll find much help there. I pray I made the right decision." As I read deeper into the journal, I began to understand the incredible courage and compassion it had taken to run this operation. The Hendersons had risked everything: their freedom, their farm, their children's safety, to help strangers in need. Chapter 8. Connections to the Present. The more I learned about the Henderson family's secret activities, the more I began to understand some of the oddities I'd noticed around the property. The stone walls I'd admired weren't just decorative. They had been strategically placed to provide cover for people approaching the house unseen. The barn's location offered a perfect view of the main road, allowing the family to spot potential trouble before it arrived. Even the layout of the house made more sense now. The kitchen's position directly above the hidden room allowed for easy communication and food delivery. The pantry's unusual depth provided storage for the extra supplies needed to feed unexpected guests. I found myself looking at my new home with completely different eyes. Every creaking board might have been stepped on by desperate families seeking shelter. Every window might have been a lookout post for watching for authorities. The house wasn't just my home. It was a monument to human kindness during one of America's darkest periods. But the journal entries also raised questions. The last entry was dated March 15, 1936, and simply read, "Operation suspended indefinitely. Too dangerous to continue. May God forgive us for the families we can no longer help." What had happened to force the Hendersons to stop their humanitarian work? And why had the room been sealed so carefully, as if they intended to hide all evidence of what they'd done? I found part of the answer in a newspaper clipping tucked into the back of the journal. The headline read, "Local farmer arrested in federal raid." The article described how federal agents had raided a farm in the next county, arresting the owner for operating an illegal shelter for transients and undesirables. The farmer had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, and his family had lost their property. The message was clear. Helping desperate families during the Depression was considered a crime by some authorities, and the penalties were severe. I began to understand why the Hendersons had sealed the room so carefully. They weren't just hiding evidence of their past activities, they were protecting future generations from potential prosecution. Chapter 9. Modern Discoveries. As I continued exploring the hidden room, I made discoveries that connected the Henderson family's story to more recent times. Tucked behind the preserved food jars, I found a small wooden box containing items from the 1970s and 1980s, long after the Depression-era shelter operation had ended. The box contained letters addressed to the current residents and signed by various members of the Henderson family. Apparently, the secret of the hidden room had been passed down through generations even after the original humanitarian operation had ended. One letter, dated 1978, was from Robert Henderson's youngest son, Billy, the suspicious child mentioned in the journal entries. Now an adult, Billy wrote, "I've never forgotten what my parents did during the hard times. Even though I was just a kid, I knew something special was happening in our house. I wanted future owners to know about the good that was done here." Another letter from 1983 came from Robert's daughter Mary, named after her mother. She wrote, "The room saved our family as much as it saved the people who stayed in it. It taught us that helping others isn't just the right thing to do. It's what makes us human. I hope whoever finds this will understand the importance of what happened here." But the most recent item in the box was what really took my breath away. It was a letter dated just 5 years earlier, written by someone named Sarah Henderson Miller, who identified herself as Robert's great-granddaughter. "I'm probably the last Henderson who knows about the room," she wrote. "My great-grandfather died when I was 12, but not before he told me the whole story. He made me promise to check on the house periodically and make sure the room remained hidden until the right person found it. He said someday, someone would buy this house who would understand the importance of what happened here and maybe even continue the tradition of helping people in need." The letter included a phone number and an address in Columbus, Ohio. Sarah had been watching over the property from a distance, waiting for someone like me to discover the family secret. I stared at the letter for a long time, realizing that my purchase of the farmhouse hadn't been as random as I'd thought. Chapter 10. Making Contact. I waited 3 days before calling the number Sarah Henderson Miller had left in her letter. Part of me was nervous about reaching out to a stranger, but a larger part was desperate to learn more about the family whose legacy I'd inherited. Sarah answered on the second ring, and when I explained who I was and what I'd found, her reaction was immediate and emotional. "Oh my God," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I've been waiting for this call for years. I drive by the house every few months just to check on it, but I never knew when someone would finally discover the room." We arranged to meet the following Saturday. Sarah lived about 2 hours away in Columbus, where she worked as a social worker, a career choice that seemed fitting given her family's history of helping others. When she arrived at the farmhouse, I was struck by how much she resembled the people in the old photographs. She had the same kind eyes and determined expression that I'd seen in pictures of Robert and Mary Henderson. "I can't believe you actually found it," she said as I led her to the kitchen and showed her the opening I'd carefully preserved. Great-grandfather always said the hiding place was so well constructed that it might never be discovered. Sarah descended into the room with the reverence of someone visiting a sacred site. She touched the stone walls gently, ran her fingers over the wooden shelves, and stood quietly for several minutes in the space where her ancestors had helped so many desperate families. "He used to tell me stories about the people who stayed here," she said finally. "Families with nothing but the clothes on their backs, children who hadn't eaten in days, men who'd lost everything but refused to give up hope. This room represented the best of what people can be when they choose to help instead of looking the other way." "What happened to the operation?" I asked. "Why did they stop?" Sarah's expression grew sad. The political climate changed. Helping transients became seen as encouraging vagrancy. There were federal crackdowns, arrests, prosecutions. My great-grandfather realized that continuing the operation would put not just his family at risk, but also the people he was trying to help. Chapter 11. A Continuing Legacy. Sarah and I spent the entire afternoon in the hidden room, going through the documents and photographs together. She filled in details about the families in the pictures, shared stories that had been passed down through generations, and helped me understand the full scope of what the Hendersons had accomplished. They helped over 200 families during the 4 years the operation was active, she told me. Some stayed for just one night, others for several weeks. Great-grandfather kept detailed records because he wanted to remember everyone who had trusted them with their lives. As we talked, I began to understand why Sarah had been so emotional about my discovery. The hidden room wasn't just a family secret. It was a reminder of values that seemed increasingly rare in modern America. "I became a social worker because of these stories," Sarah explained. "I wanted to continue the family tradition of helping people, even if I couldn't do it the same way my great-grandfather did. What do you think he would want me to do with the room?" I asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the question carefully. "I think he'd want you to understand that this house has always been about more than just providing shelter for one family. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, that helping others isn't just charity, it's responsibility." "But the room itself? Should I preserve it? Turn it into some kind of memorial?" "That's up to you," Sarah said. "But I will say this. The need for places like this hasn't disappeared. The faces of desperation look different now, but there are still people who need help, who need someone to believe in their worth when the rest of the world has given up on them." As evening approached and Sarah prepared to leave, she handed me a folder she'd brought from home. "These are copies of all the family documents I have about the room," she said. "Letters from people who stayed here, updates on their lives, stories about how this place changed their futures. I think you should have them." "Why?" I asked. "Because this is your house now, and this is your story to continue. Whatever you decide to do with the room, you should know the full history of what happened here." Chapter 12. A New Chapter. 6 months after discovering the hidden room, I made a decision that would have made Robert Henderson proud. Working with Sarah and several local social service organizations, I began the process of converting my farmhouse into a modern version of what the Hendersons had created during the Depression. The hidden room itself became a museum of sorts, a preserved space where visitors could learn about the history of the house and the families who had been helped there. But the real work was happening upstairs, where I converted 2 of the bedrooms into temporary housing for families in crisis. The program we developed was simple but effective. Families facing eviction, domestic violence, or other emergencies could stay at the farmhouse for up to 30 days while working with social workers to find permanent housing and employment. We provided not just shelter but also job training, childcare, and the kind of emotional support that the Hendersons had offered nearly a century earlier. "It's like coming full circle," Sarah said during the program's opening ceremony. "The house is doing what it was always meant to do, giving people hope when they need it most." The first family we helped was remarkably similar to those described in Robert Henderson's journal. A young mother with 2 children who had lost their apartment when the factory where she worked closed down. They stayed for 3 weeks while she completed a nursing assistant certification program, and by the time they left, she had a new job and a deposit saved for an apartment. "I don't know what we would have done without this place," she told me on their last day. "You gave us more than just a roof over our heads. You gave us our dignity back." As I write this, We've helped dozens of families over the past 2 years. The program has grown to include partnerships with local businesses, churches, and schools. The old barn has been converted into a workshop where people can learn job skills, and the pasture now hosts a community garden that provides fresh food for program participants. The farmhouse that I bought for $10,000 as an escape from city life has become something I never could have imagined. A bridge between past and present, a place where the values of the greatest generation continue to serve people in need today. The trapdoor that no one had ever mentioned turned out to be the most important feature of the house, not because of what it hid, but because of what it revealed about the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary good. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about the hidden histories that surround us every day.